Hello, everybody. My name is Victoria Lojek, and I'm going to be sharing a presentation with you today about understanding human impact on the environment using data visualization techniques through Earthtime. You can see my contact information here as well as my Twitter. And then this QR code will take you to a link of my resources that I mentioned in this presentation. So I'm Victoria Lojek, as I said, and I am one of the two STEAM teachers at South Fayette Township School District. I work at the intermediate school. So I teach STEAM to grades 3 through 5. The other STEAM teacher teaches the other half of the students. So we both co-collaborate and work together on planning and implementing all of our lessons. And I teach it to half the students and she teaches it to the other half. Our lessons are 3-day lessons. So as I go through this unit, you'll be able to kind of see that's how everything's set up. We see students for 3 days in a row for 40-minute periods, then they have 3 days off. So as we were planning this lesson, this is kind of the format we took, but each of our days are 40 minutes. So however your classroom is set up, this could definitely be implemented in either a general education classroom or a STEAM classroom and just adjusted or the timeline shortened based on how often you see your students. So we're going to talk about my unit just in general. I'm going to give you like the whole overview of the entire unit that I do, and then spend a lot of time specifically talking about the data science section of that unit, and then go into the planning process, some of the challenges I faced, as well as some of the lessons learned throughout this unit. So the overall unit is a habitat change unit, and the end goal is what you see here, where the students create a habitat change box. So they research about an animal and they choose the habitat change that's happening, and they research about that, and then they create a story told through the animal's point of view, going through that habitat change. And then we incorporate hummingbird robotics with that so that then they animate their story. So it's a unit that is pretty lengthy, but it incorporates language arts, it incorporates data science, it incorporates science, coding and robotics. So lots of different content areas encompassed in this unit. And I've taught this unit in 4th grade. So the way we kind of kick this unit off is we talk about what the students already know about habitats. So in their 4th grade science curriculum, they only teach science for half the year, and then the other half is social studies. So with the 4th grade science PSSAs happening, it's very difficult for them to get super in-depth in the topics. So what we do in STEAM is we take some of those science topics that maybe they touched on a little bit in their classroom, but they haven't delved into super in-depth, habitats being one of them. So they talk about habitats, they talk about the basics of habitats, but they don't have a chance to do like a full research project. So the way we start this unit is getting them to share out what they've already learned in their classroom about habitats, talking about ways habitats change, and then transitioning them to how we might use robotics to demonstrate changes in our habitat. The reason I have the Lorax on here is I always start by showing a clip of the Lorax because I think it really engages the students, gets them really excited about what we're going to be doing. And everyone loves the Lorax. And I show the clip of when all the trees, are cut down. And we talk about like what environmental change is that actually happens, outside of that movie. And, eventually we lead to, deforestation. And that just really gets their minds thinking of other ways habitats are destructed, animals have to leave. So it's just a fun way to get them excited about our new unit. So then after we kind of kick it off, we do habitat change slides. And what that is it's one of my resources, but kind of through this presentation, what I did was I just pulled like example pieces from my resources just to kind of show you what's all there, because there is a lot of stuff there because it is a long unit, and just kind of give you little snippets of some of the activities we do to get them ready for this big project. So one of the things that we do is I have my kids divided into 6 groups, and 3 of the groups, I give them a slide deck with 3 topics. And then the other 3 groups, I give a slide deck with 3 other habitat change topics. And these are going to be the 6 topics that they're going to be choosing to research on that connects to Earthtime, which is what the way that I incorporated data science in this project. So the topics are like coral bleaching, city growth, the forest fires, deforestation, and like those kinds of topics. And then the students actually look at pictures of them and analyze them. So they are taken through like the slideshow, and they have 3 things that they look at. So they get this picture. And before they move on to the next slide, they have a discussion with their group. Like, what do they see? What do they notice? What are things that they think this picture is representing in terms of a habitat change? So then they answer these questions. What do you think it is? Where do you think this picture was taken? Do you think this picture was taken before, during, or after a habitat change? And then there's a description about the picture. So then it tells them what this picture really is. This is coral bleaching. So it's kind of educating them, but also getting them to think outside the box before they, actually go through and read the answer. They kind of have to discuss it with their groups. And then it talks about this is at the Great Barrier Reef. And this is an example of a habitat change. Then they actually, in their groups, watch a video that talks to them specifically about coral bleaching, which we won't watch, but there's videos linked for all the different topics. And then they answer the following questions based on what they learned in the video. How does this impact humans? How does this impact animals? How does this prevent the change? And why do we think this change happens? And as they're doing this, they're actually trying to figure out of their topics, which one interests them the most. So this group would have done wildfires, deforestation, and coral bleaching, following that same process, the picture, talking with their group with the questions, reading the description, watching the video, and then answering questions again. And they're kind of like sampling 3 different topics and saying, like, which one do we think we would like to learn more about for our research project, as opposed to me just saying, you're doing wildfire, you're doing deforestation, you're doing coral bleaching. We wanted the kids to have a genuine interest in whatever they were going to spend the next several months, researching. So with this, they would rank their choices, and then we would have like a class discussion, like, okay, this group, what was your first choice? What was your second? And usually we were able to get everyone at least their first or second choice, because what we wanted to do is represent every group with a different topic, so that every table was picking one of the 6 topics, and I had 6 tables. So then when they would go to present them, it would also be a chance for them to educate their peers about a different topic. So that's kind of like the kickoff activity that gets them choosing their topic. After that, we move into the data analysis part, the part that has been added, that I added into this project. So I've done this project for several years, but I've constantly adapted it. And this was one of the ways that I adapted it whenever we were talking about this environmental justice with data science. I already had the environmental connection within this habitat project. So I thought it was the perfect place to pull in Earthtime. And then the Earthtime topics kind of aligned with habitat changes that were happening. So Earthtime has stories that they will take the students through about specific topics. So I manipulated my topics a little bit to match what was in Earthtime, so that once they chose their topic, they were able to be taken through this story. So after we did the whole choosing of the topics, then we talked about what is data. So where do we see data? How is data collected? Just kind of like a brainstorming session of what they already know about data. They shared about math. They shared about how they use different graphs and different things in their classroom. They also shared about like devices. We talked about like YouTube views and like recommendations on Netflix and those kinds of things, all about collecting data. Then we talked about other examples of data in our world. So, Apple Watches, how they're collecting data, their phones, their iPods. COVID has been a huge data collection, how a lot of jobs are looking at data collection, and sports as well. So we just kind of brainstormed all these examples of how data is used in our everyday lives, just to get them really thinking in that data mindset. And then what does it mean to be a data scientist? So we talked about that specific career and what that person does. And what was really the students enjoyed hearing about was like, it's not necessarily like you go into data science and you're only like working with data that's like not important to you. Like you could be a data scientist and work for like a sports team, or a data scientist and work for, an amusement park, or like a different company that interests you, and how data science is so used widely in so many fields that it doesn't limit you to just one specific field. And then we watched a little video about that just to get them excited, but those are just some snapshots for my slides. Then we moved into habitat change with data in Earthtime. So these were the 6 topics that are in Earthtime. So coral bleaching, city growth, deforestation, glaciers melting, sea levels rising, and wildfires. So those were the 6 topics that were described to them in those slides, but they also correlate with what's in Earthtime. So what's really cool about Earthtime is it works like a kind of like Google Earth, but with data involved. So it zooms the kids in and out of different locations, and they use these little arrow keys to go around different places. So even in this example here, you can see coral bleaching is happening with where there's like pink identified spots, but then it'll actually take you to different parts where the coral bleaching is happening and give you facts and different information about it. So as they were doing this, I went through and did the stories for each of them. And then I came up with questions at each of the different parts that the students would have to discuss. So the first couple questions were things like, what do you notice? What do you wonder about what's going on in the map? And then it would get more specific to like them following along. Some of them were like where they had to do a little analysis. Some of them were just like, did they read the caption and understand it? And they're just answering the information that they saw. So what does the purple color represent? What is red? What is orange? Why does coral bleaching occur? So sometimes it wasn't an answer directly in there, but they had to like infer based on what they were reading, why they think this is happening. And what is this data visualization trying to show us? Each of these underlined parts were like sections that like coral reefs was one section, temperature anomalies. So it was taking them through like a little story, kind of like a Prezi, if you've ever used one of those where it kind of jumps you around. And then moving on to the third one, it would talk about like a specific place. So the Great Barrier Reef, where is it located? What year did it start? What would be an example? And then Florida Reef, same kind of things. And then just a couple like problem solving questions, like why do you think there wasn't a rise in global temperatures in pre-industrial years? So like why if it was pre-industrial, why wouldn't that rise temperature? So I wanted them to be thinking about like, well, we wouldn't be using machinery, so that wouldn't be, hurting our climate as much. So there wouldn't have been as much of a rise once they learn about, why coral bleaching happens. And then going on from there, also then reflecting questions at the end. So the other thing I want to point out is, although I'm specifically talking about coral bleaching, some of these questions were consistent with were the same with other topics. So this group did coral bleaching, but like everybody did the first like section of questions under number one, and everyone did the reflection questions just about their topics. I just changed the ones that were like specific to their Earth story. So one group was doing an Earth story about coral bleaching, another group was doing wildfires, but they were all kind of getting that data analysis just in a slightly different way. And then at the end, they had to think, do you think this data is meaningful? Why is this change happening? What impact does this habitat change have on our community? And then talking about environmental justice, this is the fair treatment or meaningful involvement of people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. Out of all the places you explored, which area do you think would have had the most challenges in fixing the problem? So that's kind of how I described it to them. Like, out of all the places that they were looking at, which place do you think wouldn't have the resources or the ability to fix the problem? So that was kind of them really thinking about what they know about the countries and places that this Earthtime story took them on, and then which place they would feel needed the most help. And then what could you do to help with this problem? And then the last question was leading them to the next part, which is, out of the locations, which location would you like to choose? So in the past with this project, we would just like choose a topic, they would learn a little bit about it, and then they would pick a location where that's happening. But with this new addition, with this data science connection, I wanted them to actually see and visualize and have the visualizations of where this problem was happening, so that they could make a meaningful choice on where they would like to see, help the most. So a lot of them, just because the images of the Great Barrier Reef were really strong to them, they felt like emotionally connected to them. A lot of them chose that specific location, but then that guided them for their next part of their project. So this kind of gave them the basis of like, here are your choices of your locations that you can be using, and then choose the one that interests you the most. And then that's where we'll take us for the next part. So this probably took maybe like 2.5 days. I have a timeline that kind of shows the breakdown for them to get through this Earthtime part, but I felt like it was a super meaningful part of the unit to have them see that analysis and make that, personal connection. And that's one of the things that the Earthtime creators talk about in their video when they kind of share about this, is that they wanted there to be, it's easy for us to like kind of not think about what's happening in other places because it's not like happening right outside our doors, but like this actually took them into those places and they could see what was happening, and it made them excited about wanting to impact or wanting to change what was happening. So then we move into the research part. So now they have their topic and they have their place. So that was kind of like the goal for those two parts. The first part was just choosing their topic, taking them to Earthtime. Now they have their place. Now we move into the research part. So basically what I did was I created a basic research document that all the students worked together to fill out. They had to then think of an animal research an animal that lived in that spot. So now they have like their Great Barrier Reef. They have to look up and research animals that live there that would be potentially impacted by the coral bleaching, losing their home, those kinds of things. So they fill out some of these questions about just their location in general. And then this document actually goes further to like, okay, tell me about your animal. Which also ties in another science concept. In addition to the habitat part in the habitat change, another part of their science in fourth grade is knowing about animals. So we threw in like words like, is your animal nocturnal? Is your animal a carnivore, an herbivore? Like those kinds of words too, just to get them, or is they predator? Who's their predator? Who's their prey? Just to get them applying those vocabulary words that they were talking about in science to, this bigger project. So after they finished their habitat research, we kind of took a break from that heavy writing and researching and reading part of this. And we wanted them to get excited about the robotics connection. And then we're going to go back to that part. So these students had not used Hummingbird robotics before doing this project. Typically we use them in third grade, but with COVID and everything, that didn't happen last year. So this is like their very first introduction. And one of the science concepts that they talk about in fourth grade is circuitry. And if you've ever used Hummingbird robotic kits, basically what they are is they are a little circuit board that the students program, and they program different lights and motors to light up different colors, or and the motors to change and move in different directions. So it's the perfect place to tie in circuitry because they have to wire everything correctly in order for it to program and work correctly. So we start by that connection. We talk about closed and open circuits. We talk about series and parallel circuits, which is also a science concept that, relates to this. And then we actually talk about the Hummingbird bit, which is this is what they used. So you can see here, this is where they plug in their different lights. And then over here is where they plug in their different motors. We just did lights and motors. We didn't get into sensors. And then the actual microbit itself is what stores their program on it. So what's really cool about this project is once you have your program created, it'll save onto this microbit, and all you need is a battery pack, and it will run your project. So when it came to like a celebration night where the parents come, I just went around and turned on all their projects and they all started running. I didn't need to have like everybody's individual computer and find their coding and who had the coding and all of those kinds of things. It took all that complexity out, and it made it really simple for me to just go around and turn on their projects. So once we introduce the Hummingbird and we talk about different pieces of it, we go into programming the lights and servos. So this is where I kind of loop back to that Lorax part at the beginning. And we actually give them a picture from the Lorax, and then we print out 2 copies of it. So I just picked a picture from the movie, and one copy they put on a piece of cardboard, the other copy they keep, and they apply what we've been doing with the hummingbirds to try to light up the grass green, light up the sky blue, and light up a tree red. So I just kind of show you here with the dots where the kids we actually poke holes in their cardboard at those spots, and then they poke the lights through and actually light up the scene. So the purpose of doing this activity was, since it was their first time using the Hummingbird, that's what kind of makes this unit longer than typical. I needed to make sure they all knew how to use all the lights and use all the motors. So I wanted to give them all the same like requirements. Everyone needs to light this up, this up, this up, because then it's achieving like, do they know how to do this? Because when we go back to our habitat project, they're going to have to choose what lights they want to use. And I wanted to make sure they had all the skills to make those decisions, and then to be able to independently choose their lights and have that creative piece. So this is a very like prescribed project intentionally, because I was assessing them to see, are they capable of, programming all the lights and programming the motors. So once they had everything programmed, this is what it looked like. The lights popped through and it lit up the screen, which once again got them excited about doing this as a whole project. Then we added in the servo part where they made their tree look like it was falling down and the axe look like it was swinging. So that allowed me to talk about the two different servos. One spins around in a circle and one goes side to side. So incorporating that as well. So then we got to the fun part. They started creating their story for their box. So if we think back to the box at the beginning, the nice part about the box is every student had a side that they were responsible for. So they were responsible for writing that part of the story, painting that part of the box, as well as programming that part of the box. So for example, one part of the box would be like before the habitat change. So it would show like this beautiful coral, all colorful. Then like the next part would be like during the habitat change. So maybe part of it was white and the other part was still colorful. So a student would do the during, and then after would be like everything's white and the habitat, went through the major change. And then the last person would do prevention. So their side would be a little bit different, where they were talking about ways that you could prevent it. And then the top of the box is their title. So that would go over whatever title their story was. So these are just pieces of foam board that I got from the dollar store, and I cut into squares. And then every student got a square that they were able to paint. And then I would tape the whole box together so it was all connected at the end. So this is just them painting. And then the storyboarding part, once they had their part, they had to come up with a storyline for the animal based on their research. So this is where they would draw their scene for the painting aspect. They had to identify their setting, introduce their character, like, hi, my name is, like, as if they were the animal, like, hi, my name is Joey and I'm a dolphin that lives near the Great Barrier Reef. And here's how, I'm affected by it or whatever. And then an interesting fact. So as they were researching, they had to find interesting facts about their animal and their location, and they kind of weaved those into their story. Then they created their narration and their hummingbird aspects, the lights, the servos, those different kinds of things in their projects. This was more of the planning stage. Then they chose, because of the limitations of the hummingbird, we had to make sure that every group didn't try to use 8 lights when we could only use, 5. So they had to make sure that they were discussing and collaborating with their members, like, hey, I want to use a green light because in my part of the story, it needs to be green here. And another person wanted to use a green light. If there weren't enough green lights, they had to, discuss that and figure out which person would be best using which resource. So it was a nice, they all had their own ownership of their own part, but then they also had to work with their other groups, mainly from the restraint of the actual hummingbird device. So then we go into the programming, story writing, and presenting part. So this is where they actually take that research, that information that they've been learning through Earthtime, through the research, and they write their full story with their group members. So each person wrote a paragraph, but once again, it was that collaboration of what happened in your paragraph, because I need to know for my paragraph because I'm the middle, and then that person has to flow after. So that was kind of challenging for a 4th grader to, they're used to doing things independently or completely together. So this kind of in between was challenging for them to figure out, and they had to work through that with their group members, but it allowed them to make a nice flowing story that incorporated everybody's ideas and not just one person writing the story for the whole group, which sometimes happens when you do a full fledged group project. So this is the make code that they used to program their hummingbird. Once they had everything, their box put together, it was painted, they had their story done, then became the fun part of programming it. So every side of the box had one light and one motor that had to somehow be part of their story. So what they would do is they would read their story, and then they would rotate their box to kind of show the animation that they programmed. So here are some examples of the finished products. We did presentations on these at the end, which were super fun for the students. The other nice part about the box aspect is all the hummingbird things are actually hidden underneath them. So the bottom is open, so you can lift them up and you could see all the lights and everything underneath, but it contains everything from in the inside. So I'll just kind of show you this video. I don't know how well the sound will come through.
They are putting the fire out, and there's smoke everywhere. The smoke finally cleared out. There's so much damage.
So if you couldn't hear the sound, it was just the students reading the story that goes with this. So but you could tell they were rotating the box and showing every different aspect of the story that all the different students created. So the light and then the moving part of their story with their animal. So this was about Ryan and the wildfire. So going back through to the planning process. So I know that was a lot of just like unit stuff. So I wanted to kind of break down how the planning happened with this. So the days 1 through 3. So as I mentioned before, these are 40-minute class periods. So, and I see them in like 3-day chunks at a time. So that's kind of how I organized it, just because it made sense to me. But this can be completely adapted in many different ways. One of the ways that I thought about adapting this in a future year, just to shorten the length of this project, is even taking like the hummingbird and doing a hummingbird project early on in the year so that they know how to use the hummingbird. And that would kind of shorten that like learning of the hummingbird part as well. Cause that was like learning about habitats and hummingbirds. That's why it took 21 40-minute periods to complete this project. But basically that introduction habitat change slides were days 1 through 3. The data science analysis, the Earthtime introduction, the answering the questions, the students working through Earthtime stories was about from days 4 to 6. Habitat research was days 7 through 9. And then programming lights and servos in the Lorax scene was 10 through 12. And then 13 through 15 was the storyboarding and painting. Kids will take a long time to paint if you give them a long time to paint. So we learn to just give them like 1 day to paint and like 1 day to like tell them they only have 1 day and then they won't get done. And then like already know you have like a bonus day and so that they can finish. Like you just have to do the 2 days or else there's many tears about not finishing in 1 day. So 2 days is what we gave for painting. And then the 3rd day, they were able to work on their story. And then days 16 through 21, I just looped those together. That was programming, their story writing. And then we had 1 day that was just completely devoted to them presenting their projects. So as I mentioned, we actually use these for our like celebration, which is when the parents come and we have things on display. And we put all of these at every table. So in my room, I ended up having 36 of these boxes. And right before the parents came, I went around and turned them all on. And it sounded like an airplane was taking off in my room because it was like so many motors and things moving. But then as soon as the families and stuff came in, you couldn't hear them anymore. But they were able to, the batteries lasted and they were on all night. So they had their stories right there. So students would pick up their stories, read them to the parents, and parents could watch the, animation happening with the servos and the lights. So some challenges and things that I would change. I would say the biggest challenge is like with a big project like this, trying to keep all the timing in place between the group members and then the overall amount of time spending on the project, like knowing when to like cut them off and move on to the next part. Because, you don't want to move on one group and then have all these other groups behind. So just kind of balancing that. That's just, a struggle that I always have though, with teaching as many classes as I do, having, all those classes try to stay on the same pathway, as well as the groups within a class, and part of that I think has to do with how you arrange the groups. The classroom teachers are actually in STEAM with me. So they choose who their group members are. So sometimes I'll have certain classroom teachers that'll put like all the strong kids together and, all the kids that maybe need a little more support together. And then like the strong kids will be done in 2 seconds. And then the kids that need support will need a lot more time, where other teachers will kind of divide out the kids, spread them out a little bit more. So that kind of is a challenge for me because I don't have a lot of control over that, making sure everything was on the same pace. Helping students understand environmental justice connection. That was a very hard concept for them to grasp. So that I struggled with like kind of thinking of different ways for them to understand that. And then for the future, part of this too could be completed in their classroom. So some of the research parts, some of the science connection parts could be put in their classroom and then timed with, coming back into STEAM. And then lessons learned. Students really loved Earthtime. They were super excited about it, like more so than I was expecting them to be. They related it a lot to Google Earth, and like they love Google Earth. They love to like look up their house and do all that kind of stuff. So I was really pleasantly surprised with how interested they were and how engaged they were with that. And then the other thing that I kind of realized is this data analysis thing was already happening in my classroom. I just had to make an intentional effort to pull it out and make sure I was talking about it. And then once again, environmental justice is difficult for the 4th graders to understand. But I think if we build, an alignment throughout K through 5 that by the time they get to 4th grade, they would have more of a basic knowledge of it. Since it was our first year introducing it to them, it was hard. But I think if we're more intentional about introducing parts of it in the younger grades and moving it through, that would help with that. So that is my presentation. If you have any questions, you can always email me at vllojak@South Fayette. I also have a link to my resources here. So any of the things that I mentioned, where I talked about the Earthtime questions, I have the questions, I even have the answer keys, so you can just print those out and you're ready to go. I have the slides. Throughout my presentation, I just pulled portions of my student slides, but I have all the slides that I shared with my students and my lesson plans for the entire unit, in addition to just the data science lesson. So thank you so much.